A good friend of mine's mom had multiple sclerosis and she was bedridden. I would come visit her every so often and come over and bring a pipe with some flour in it and help her smoke. And then there was a certain point where she actually couldn't smoke anymore. And then we started making some edibles for her. But the thing that I will never forget is that anytime after she would have either a smoke or would have an edible, she would just have a big smile on her face and I feel no pain. And it helped her not take all the drugs that the doctors were prescribing for at the time. A lot of the Valium, some of the opiates that she was taking for pain management and stuff like that. So it was my first real exposure to seeing the benefits that it could have for people with terminal diseases. My name is Jeff Calegari, and I use cannabis for anxiety and sleep for over 25 years. Currently, I am CEO and co-founder of a direct-to-consumer marketplace called GetHerb.co, but I started off in a field called live blood analysis, and I got my nutritional consultant certification, and I've always wanted to look at the body from a holistic perspective. That's really why I've come full circle now with doing cannabis full-time. Growing up in the 80s, it definitely had a stigma to it. It definitely was more on the fringe. Now, was it readily available? Yeah, it was recreationally, and we always had access to it. It really took into the late 90s where I started to become part of more of the medical movement, the compassionate care movement, that things really started to kind of change. Public awareness started to become better, and just my comfort in finding my tribe and the community that I wanted to build around actually became easier. So my first foray with a cannabis-related product was when I was about 14 years old, and a friend of mine actually had a ball of hash. Honestly, I didn't feel much of anything. It felt a bit risque. It felt, like we were doing something wrong, but we were just out in the hills having a fun time, and I don't remember much of the high. I would say the first time I really got high was freshman year of high school at a party, and somebody gave me a bong. And next thing I know, I'm out on the lawn and looking at the stars and having a good old time. So the medical conditions that I use cannabis for, I would say are on the lower end of the spectrum of what I have come to know the benefits of cannabis can be used for. So sleep and anxiety, it's something that just calms me down and brings me into a state where the mind's not racing and it just allows your body to relax. I feel like that has been my happy zone. I've seen it used in so many other ways, but for me personally, it is literally just around that anxious part of life and then also just calming down. That experience put the idea of health and cannabis together. And at that same time, I was doing what's called live blood analysis. And so I was working not necessarily with cannabis and helping people with their health, but helping people with diet and looking at their health from a different perspective. I saw cannabis as an adjunct therapy for specific people who might be suffering what I was suffering from, anxiety or stress or sleep problems and stuff like that. The last 25 years of being involved in cannabis, that most of that has been on the down low. Like my parents didn't know, my family didn't know as well too, and I was active within the community that I was active in. And so I was completely nervous about trying to tell my parents that, hey, I'm involved in cannabis now. And I remember saying to them over the phone that, I got a new job. And they go, well, what's this new job you got? And I goes, well, I'm working in the cannabis industry. And they were both like floored in the most positive way, because they were just like, Lois, she goes down to the clinic to get her husband's medicine. And so it seemed like the whole stigmatism around it had disappeared and I was still holding on to it. And so it really freed me up, not only emotionally, but mentally, and just allowed me to feel comfortable for once, not only just with my parents, but on top of that was telling people, hey, I'm in the cannabis industry. Take things slow, and the anxiety or anything you have is all from a new experience. The nice thing about different products nowadays is you actually can get ones that are really designed to do something very minimally in your system. Now, if you take too much, you're not going to end up here. There are products now that just give you a taste. And if that taste doesn't work, then you just add a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And pay attention to your habits and utilize the medicine for what it was intended. Once you start looking at something therapeutically, you actually are looking at it from a different lens, not the young crazy kid that was using it recreationally, but the one that's using it medicinally, and finding out what actually is that dosage that works for treating this specific symptom. And so microdosing became a very specific type of my protocol. And the one great thing about the standardization and the regulation on products is that they've really gotten to a good place of being able to dose things properly. And I went through a whole stage back in the late 90s of making brownies, and they became death brownies because I would tell somebody to eat only a quarter. And then, of course, you can't just eat a quarter. And then 2 hours later, I'm getting a call, and trying to avoid that is number one. And so it came through a lot of experimentation, but then also an industry getting from its infancy to where it's actually providing a dosable medicine. I use cannabis probably about 3 or 4 times a week. That's probably about it, just in the form of microdosed edibles. I feel like I've reached a certain point where I've found my happy zone with it.
Learn more about cannabis and begin your medical cannabis journey at leafwell.com.